Okay. So welcome and assalamu alaikum. This is Dr. Hatem Bazian from UC Berkeley, the Islamophobia Studies Center. And we really wanted to jump into a conversation. Many of us have read the news on Emmanuel Macron's speech, focusing on really the status and the position of Islam and Muslims in the French context, with really focusing on governing and controlling with a heavy intrusion on the Muslim communities within France. When we think about racism, racism is really about governing the body, space, and time of targeted or otherwise communities. We're waiting to have Horia to join us, but really it's a pleasure to have with us Hamza Ismaili, who was a visiting graduate student for us at UC Berkeley doing his PhD, and he's in the final stage of writing his PhD. So he's been, as well as his wife, both were with us at UC Berkeley, cooperated on actually organizing the last 2019 Paris conference with us, the 6th annual conference. So it's really a pleasure to have you with us, Hamza.
Thank you,
This
Dr. Hassan. Thank
conversation.
you.
And Ramon Grasfugel, our faculty in comparative ethnic studies, a co-organizer in a lot of the efforts that we do in Islamophobia and critical Muslim study on decolonial studies as well. So Ramon, it's good to see you and welcome.
Thanks for the invitation, Hatem. Salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. And we'll wait for Horia. I'm still working with her on WhatsApp to see if she's going to be able to join. She's having hard time connecting to Zoom. So maybe Hamza, you could take us from the ground in France and give us really the reading of what Macron's speech is about and what really is the intention behind it. And then we could actually begin to navigate this moment.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Hatem, for organizing this. I do think that we have to put on a lot of collective effort to understand what's coming for us here in France as a Muslim community or as Muslim communities. We can, as you said, state the facts. So Macron did a first speech about a law to be, which is explicitly against what he calls Islamic separatism. Of course, as in many cases like this, there is no definition of what is separatism, but still Macron stated some facts that he seems to think that are obvious. Like he said, for instance, that there is a global crisis of Islam worldwide. For instance, he also suggested that, for instance, school should be now mandatory for toddlers, 3 years old toddlers, and it is said to be a measure against Muslims not putting their children in schools. He has say that controls on mosques and organizations and associations, charities and NGOs and this kind of associations will be much more strengthened. So yeah, there, as you said in your introduction, it is all about governing the Muslim community, and all of this was already implemented by the state, which is the fact that is very shocking for us is how it can be now explicitly against the Muslim community with the
Now,
yes.
we talked about, this whole notion of separatism and then the idea that Islam is in a crisis worldwide and using the crisis worldwide, whichever that definition is,
Yes.
I'm assuming that Macron is a theologian, that he's making that statement. So how is that notion of the global crisis of Islam is used as a way to target French citizens in a very particular way?
Yes, absolutely. I think when Macron says that there is a worldwide crisis in Islam, he means that Islam in global level is a threat to the world. I think he means it like this, more than anything, more than the idea that there is a theological crisis or more a political crisis. Of course, it can't be something about, I don't know, the states in Muslim majority countries, because we know that France, for instance, is one of the largest arms supplier for many of the most brutal regimes in Muslim majority countries. I'm thinking of Egypt, I'm thinking of Saudi, and which, we know that French arms and weapons are being used, for instance, in Yemen. So of course it can't be this. Of course he's not. He can be speaking about theology, but of course the main idea is that Islam is a threat to the world on the global level. And starting from that, he links it to the idea that there is an interior enemy. Actually, it was said by the prime minister a few weeks ago, saying that France is being threatened in its core by the coalition, he said, of its enemies, among them terrorists, separatists, and a few others, Islamists and a few others. So it's very clear that there is a link between the interior enemy, the interior threat, and the global threat, which is Islam to the world.
And you said earlier when we were talking that that today there was a raid on a mosque already, and this mosque is one of the institutions that the government itself created.
Actually, yes, not the government. It's not the mosque that the government created, but the organization from which the mosque, in which the mosque is part, which is the Conseil Français du Culte Musulman, which was implemented by Nicolas Sarkozy in 2003, and the mosque is part of the this organization. Yes, as a matter of fact, here in France we have maybe we have dozens of mosques that are being closed in a very natural and natural way. But here the difference is that this mosque is very ancient in Paris. It's as I said earlier, it's very linked to the French institutions themselves, and also that there was absolutely no reason whatsoever for and actually the police claimed no reason for the raid on the mosque. After a while, they just say that it was routine control on the mosque. So you have seen policemen dressed like soldiers coming into it was a children's course, Arabic course, and you have 15 soldiers coming into the children's course, and I can let you know how.
So I actually have Horia on the phone. She is unable to connect. So you're right now are able to speak to people on through my phone. So we were just talking.
Sorry for that.
That's
I have a big problem with Zoom.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we began with discussion with Hamza about Macron's speech, and we spoke about regulating the body, space, and time of Muslims in France, and wanted to take your perspective on what is taking place and how do you read both his speech, but in general, we've been talking about that France has been the laboratory for Islamophobia, for putting all the regulations, whether hijab, whether intervening in Muslim civil society. So how do you see the situation yourself?
It's my turn to speak?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Salam alaikum. Salam Hamza, if you hear me.
I hear you. I hear you very well.
Yes, you're right when you say that France is a laboratory, a perfect laboratory of Islam. It's a model of Islamophobia for the whole Western world. Things are getting crazy here in France. Since I don't know if you heard about that, now they are talking in the debate in France about the fact that Muslims don't want to take the bath naked. This is the debate in France, and this is for the French debaters, for the French intellectuals, a subject of debate. How Muslims do the toilets. I don't know if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, meaning that trying to at least try to say that Muslims need to undertake their bathing and how they go to the bathroom. So it becomes a
Yes.
subject of intervention by the government.
Exactly. This is completely crazy. This is completely crazy. And these debates takes place now, right now, in the TV shows.
Mm.
In the TV shows. And this is, for the debaters, a sign of extremism.
Mm.
So, yes, and this is completely crazy, really. And it's not only crazy, it's frightening. It's frightening.
How about the school? I know that there's been intervention in the school system, not only for the hijab, but we had a number of the cases where a Muslim mother can't join or participate in outing with her kids if she's wearing the hijab. And now it's actually intervening on the possibility of homeschooling that has to be subject to monitoring. So how does that relate in relations to the daily life of Muslims?
There was a kind of law that passed 2 or 3 years ago about this question. It's not a national law, but it is a kind of law that can be practiced in the local scale, and a director of a school can decide that women cannot go to schooling with their children when they have the scarf. Yes.
Mm. And Ramon, you've been back and forth working in France for some time, and both you're engaged with the decolonial ideas as well as being engaging with the people, indigenous people of the Republic. So, how do you read these regulations that are continuously coming in France? We can't hear you. Ramon, we can't hear you. No, we can't hear you.
Yeah. Now, do you hear
now
me?
We can hear you.
You?
Yes.
Okay. So, what I want to say is the following. This reminds me of the work done by an artist, a Peruvian artist in Barcelona. Her name is Daniela Ortiz. She took all the Spanish press, and wherever it took all the news related to Muslims, and wherever it says mosque, she put there synagogue. Wherever it says in the news Muslim, she put Jews. Wherever it says Judaism, she put Islam. And then printed like a newspaper with all the news, okay, about Muslim, Islam, mosque, you name it, but changing the terms to synagogue, Jews, Judaism, etc. And when you read that newspaper, it's amazing because it's as if you were in the 1930s Nazi environment in Europe. And she tried to do the same thing with the French press, with a museum in France, but they forbid her from doing that. And she didn't get the acceptance from the museum to doing that. But I tell you something, I was reading and listening to Macron's speech. I read it twice. And if you do that exercise and change the wording, wherever it says Muslims, you put Jews. Wherever it says, Islam, you put Judaism. Mosque, you put synagogue. We are back to fascism. That's a fascistic law. And what Macron is doing is normalizing through a law what is being already done in practice with Muslims in France, but now normalizing it by turning the whole thing into a law. And so what he's doing is institutionalizing fascism. I can imagine what is coming for Muslims in France, honestly. This is a complete, this is like going back to 1930s, in Europe. This is like the kind of things that were put forward against Jews by the Nazis and by the collaborative regime of France during the Nazi occupation, persecuting Jews. And this is exactly what they're doing now with Muslims. So French is again repeating the same problems that they did against Jews in the 1930s and Second World War. Now they're doing it against Muslims in France. It's a complete anti-Semitic, if you want to use that term, Islamophobic, racist law. But what is interesting is that these things that Macron is talking about is being done. I mean, he's talking about 5 things: social order, where now the prefect of, which is the police authority in any county, okay, to use the American term for people who are listening to us, can overrule the decision from the municipalities. For example, if how do you say, the mayor of a small city accepts the division in a swimming pool between girls and boys, okay, and separate the sex in a swimming pool, in terms of as a recognition to the Muslim in the city where he's the mayor, and he's accepting certain hours a day where women alone and men alone can be separated. The prefect of police prefect can overrule it now with this new law. I mean, these are things that they've been doing it, but they've been doing with, illegally in many ways. Many things that this guy is talking about, Macron, now is putting into a law all these practices that before were very ambiguous in the eyes of the French law. The second thing they're doing is about associations. The concept of separatism that they're using is targeting association. Now they are going to close down any association that they see, or before it was if you were related to terrorism or stuff like that. Now it doesn't matter. Now you don't have to be related to terrorism for closing down your association. Now you can be just promoting some schooling or reading of the Quran in a group of among a group of Muslims. That could be read already as separatism in this law. The same in the schools. The schools cannot have a halal food for Muslims. This is against the principle of the Republic. They all have to eat pork, etc. They have to eat what everybody eats. He's calling for a national Islam that is an Islam that is French-centric. I mean, which already is an amazing concept, because how could you make French-centric, let's say, Christianity or Judaism or any other faith, Then he's saying also that they're going to have a state government office in each building wherever Muslims live. He called it to provide services. In fact, this is policing. This is persecution. This is an outrageous law. I don't understand, honestly, how French people of all faith, even atheists, even leftists, can accept a law like this. Because as we know in history, if you put a law like this forward that is overtly stating Muslims, but it's a law that could be applied to anybody. that law that begins against the Muslims is going to go after everybody, because the concept of separatism they're using here could be applied to any faith, could be applied to the left, could be applied to anybody. It's so problematic the way this is written that we're talking about a law that is going to go after everybody. In his rhetoric, he's using Muslims as an example. He doesn't mention Jews, he doesn't mention Christian. He said that they are okay, but the law applies to everybody. So at some point, it's going to harm everybody. So this is a very dangerous law, you know? And so I have more to say. I will stop here just for the sake of the conversation.
Maybe Hamza, I know that you have done some work on the targeting or regulating of Muslims relative to terrorism and violence, but it seems now it's both trying to regulate them in terms of their space, but more importantly, it's actually to think about almost creating a theological school of thought called the French Republic Islam. And in this sense, again, it's an exception because you don't see the same type of intervention, whether it's for the Jewish community or the Catholic Church or any of the other communities. So not only that you actually have regulations of space and relative to violence and so on, but actually is going and intruding on the specificity of the Islamic practices.
Hatem, let me say something.
Go ahead.
Look at this. They're talking about some foreign intervention in France, okay? And they're using the Muslims. Listen, there are many French citizens that are members of the Israeli army. You cannot have more discrepancy in terms of loyalty to a country than many Jews in France today that are Zionists and that are having double allegiances to both France and Israel. And not only that, many of them, you have many people that are part of the Israeli army. This is, I mean, this is outrageous, and they don't say anything about that. And here you have associations, you have civil society, Muslim organizations, and now they're going after them. Now, these same people who are complaining about Saudi money invested in communities in France, these are the same people who are selling weapons to the Saudis to go and kill people in Yemen and in other parts of the world. You know, these are the same elites of France. This law, I mean, you need to understand that in France, this term of communitarianism, for English-speaking people that don't understand what this means, is a term used in the French Republic to basically say that any community that is discriminated and that is making a claim against the state for discrimination is called communitarianism. That's a term in the French context that means like you're being selfish, you're being only asking things for yourself. Here we're all equal, we're all citizens. We should be asking for things for everybody. Why are you complaining about your own community? That's communitarianism. In doing that, what they do with this mechanism of accusing of communitarianism, any claim of a community of discrimination against the state, what they do with this is to corner the community, to silence the community, to accuse them, discredit them in the eyes of all the French citizens and republic. You know, so this is a concept that is already very tainted. And so what they're doing now is, in fact,
can we get maybe to Hamza and then we'll pick up this issue on
but let me finish this point, and it's 1 minute. In France, you have a white communitarianism that is hidden under the French Republic, and they're the ones calling the others communitarianists. Okay? So, for example, you have white elites in France making decisions in closed-door offices that is affecting every citizen in France. You know, elites, capitalist elites, financial elites, political elites, that they're in closed rooms, sitting in a separatist way. I mean, if you're going to apply this law, they should apply to themselves. But the reality is that they're producing this law against the people they oppress. They are the ones that have a white communitarianism in power that accuse everybody else of being communitarianists. And they're the ones who have a separatist structure of domination, where you have white elites in, dark offices deciding over the life of millions of French, okay, and affecting their life in negative ways. And these people are not accused of being separatists, you see, and leaving thousands to unemployment, having a lot of people out of these decisions of the white separatists, in power. So this is a double standard from all kind of point of view you can see, okay? And this is a form of white supremacy, disguised under a rhetoric of equality and French Republic.
Okay. So Hamza, going back to you.
Thank you, Doctor. Yes, I think one should be a little accurate about what's new in this plan regarding what was already implemented here in France. For instance, the raid that was in the mosque yesterday, it's not the first raid by the French administrations on mosques since many years. You have something like 200 mosques that were closed in the past few years, and most of them were not due to security reasons, but more of hygiene and wrong construction and this kind of things. And this was admitted by the former interior minister, who said that they were mostly using common law against mosques than anti-terrorist law. So this is something that's official, but still I think there is something new about this this new discourse on separatism. Is like you pointed, Doctor, is that they are not making any link between the fight against the so-called Islamism and terrorism. It's not about violence. It's not at all about violence. It's about the attacks that happened in France in the last few years. It's something else. It's the idea that there are people here in the French society that are not behaving individually and as groups as they should behave, as they should be. As you said earlier, it's all about governing people as individuals and as collectives. So yes, I agree. And there is the very frightening thing, and this is maybe where the comparison with anti-Semitism should be, is that there is a very conspirationist idea about the Muslims here in French. For instance, I had a personal experience a few weeks ago. I was invited by the French Senate to speak about these things. About it was right before this law, and so I was invited there by the Collective Against Islamophobia in France. They were summoned to come, but they sent me instead of them, and so I went there. And in the same spot, for instance, there was a so-called intellectual who said that the Muslim Brotherhood was about to take over France. And this idea is very present now in the debates. It can be said about officials, from officials saying, for instance, the French Minister of Interior saying that the Muslim Brotherhood is about to take over France, take over government power, and so on. So this is this very conspirationist idea about the Muslims, which is indeed very it reminds us of anti-Semitism and the ongoing history of anti-Semitism in France. I mean, this is the very frightening part, I think, of this new discourse about separatism. The very strange thing is that you have this very I mean, if I was French and non-Muslim French, I was to hear what the government saying about the Muslim community, I will be very, very scared. I will be thinking that there is this giant plot against France, and there will be people who in a few weeks maybe will be running things and ruling France over Sharia or I don't know what. But the very strange thing is that even if there are, of course, the measures that Macron announced a few days ago are horrifying, are very dangerous to the Muslim community, but they are not on the same level than the general discourse that is being framed. I mean, the French government is saying that there is a Muslim plot against France about the very core of the republic. So this is when you are saying that the answer is going to be that you're not allowing any more I don't know, the teaching of Arabic, it's not on the same level. You know, it's of
Mhm.
course it's a major break on the social pact between the state and the society and so on. But still, you know, it's not answering to the fear that it's creating among the French society. So my hypothesis here is that the French state is in the same time it's preparing the war, I mean the physical war, and in the same time preparing the peace.
Mm.
The French state is offering a pacification, which means, of course, which means domination, which means more and more governing the Muslim bodies and communities and so on. And in the same time, he's saying this could happen if you don't abide. This is the idea, I think, that's very important in the new discourse about separatism. And I think that in this case, of course, when Ramon Gosfogel thinks of the 30s, everybody thinks of the 30s. Of course, everybody thinks of what happened a few decades ago in France, in Germany, when the French deported the millions of people to the camps. Of course, everybody thinks of that. But I think even the state uses that as a weapon, uses this fear that what could happen, because everybody knows what is the true violence of the state.
Mm.
And I think even the state is using that against the Muslims, because the Muslims are not the Muslims in general, but the general idea is, since there is no physical violence, you know, we can do by we can adapt. I think this is the whole idea on this new separatism discourse, is that in the same time where the government of Muslims is more and more intruding and dangerous for the very existence of this community and transmission and intergenerational transmission, but in the same time they are saying this could happen if you don't abide. I think this is the core of the political dispositif that is being held upon our heads.
Yeah. And maybe I'll get to Horia, maybe to see what is the reaction or involvement maybe of the other sectors of the political landscape in France, maybe the response of the left. Are any of the French left responding in a positive way? I know that there's been often the tension, or at least they want to speak for Muslims, but they don't want to be next to Muslims. So, how is the response of the French left to this really massive reorientation of the state power and committing structural violence against the community?
Yes, maybe the first thing I want to say is to stress the fact that this discourse of Macron is taking place to prepare the presidential elections in 1 year and a half. I think that it's important to understand that there is a competition now between him and the far right, and his calculation is to say that she will be Marine Le Pen, who is the representative of the far right, is going to be very racist, and she wants to gagner les élections, to win the elections by being very racist. So he is trying to do better than her on the ground of Islamophobia. This is the first thing. It means that in France, the politicians think that the only way to win is to be racist. It's important to understand that. And the second thing is that on a certain way, they are right, because the left doesn't say anything about this question. The left is very timid. Even if we can see an evolution in, for example, the first opposition in France, which is represented by Mélenchon. Mélenchon is becoming more and more in the side of the Muslims. This is a very good evolution. But it's not strong enough. It's not strong enough, because it has to be more strongly with the Muslims, which is not the case really. And I think that from an activist point of view, from a political point of view, from our point of view, we have to develop a discourse on separatism. And we can't say it's difficult for us to prove that we are not separatists. It's difficult to prove it. So I think that strategically speaking, we have to say that yes, we want to be separated. Why? Because I think that it's true that we want to be separated from this Islamophobic republic. We want to be separated from the injustice. We want to be separated from Zionism because we want to be separated and we want to something else. I think that now there is no choice. We have to be revolutionary. There is no other choice because on the ground, we, as Ramon said, we are going. What is behind? What is devant? In front of us is fascism. It's clearly fascism. It's just a question of years. It's a question of years. So I think that if we take into account the Yellow Vest movement, and if we take into account that people are getting more and more poor in France, we have to think about how we can build alliances with all the sectors of the people, because Macron, even if is getting more and more racist, is actually his basis is very weak. He's very weak. A lot of people hate him. A lot of white people hate him. This is true. So I think that we have to think about a political alternative which has to be more offensive, less shy. This is my point of view.
Yeah, I think for people, Macron's polling is about 38% right now in terms of his approval of polling in France. And Marine Le Pen is right there next to him or a little bit less than him. So the two major political figures in France that are capturing the political discourse, either you have clear fascism with Marine Le Pen, coming from a party that is neo-Nazi, her father being neo-Nazi and so on, and then Macron, who's actually playing on these sentiments in order to capture some on the right or center right, and then the left will be, in essence, having no choice but to vote for Macron. So in a sense that the way to win elections in France is on the basis of Islamophobia. And the research is very clear. Islamophobia tends to spike during election cycles. And what we're seeing is, again, you're correct in saying that this is positioning for the upcoming election. The second part, which I also is very important, is that whenever we have an economic crisis, rather than actually blaming those who have caused the economic crisis or the pain, or those who are actually benefiting from it, you find a scapegoat. And in the United States, the scapegoat has been the Latino population, the Black population, the Muslims have been scapegoated. And it's similar in France. You use Islamophobic notions, you use the scapegoating of these communities as a way to really fan the flame and get into seats of power. Let me speak on a third point, and you could react and jump in, is that Macron is also having strong relations with the United Arab Emirates, both in terms of weapons sales, but more so on this notion that the Brotherhood movement and that they're all over France and in Europe. And last year's conference in December, if you remember, we had the discussion about this discourse that is coming from abroad, the relationship with Egypt, the relationship with Saudi Arabia, the relationship with United Arab Emirates, and even the attempts also to regulate the Turkish population in France, all fitting in that what we want in France is an apolitical Muslim, the huggable Muslim, the likable Muslim, the tickleable Muslim, but definitely not the Muslim who's assertive or have any type of political uh, agency or agenda. So how does that fit into the discussion and the debate that is taking place, considering that Macron is also looking at the Muslim world to for affirmation of his position. He wants the Al-Azhar's position, like when Marie Le Pen went to Al-Azhar to get the support of Al-Azhar, which is oxymoronic in a sense, saying that you don't want international or transnational Muslim influence, but you go to Al-Azhar to get the stamp of approval for a French domestic issue. So the contradiction is right there. But, you know, you don't want to tell them that because it's a little bit slow on their part to realize these contradictions. But go ahead.
I agree absolutely on these very yes, this is just a fact, but it's funny because the person I was talking about earlier, this so-called intellectual, which is Moroccan, who say that the Muslim Brotherhood is about to take over France, which his name is Zineb El Ghazwi. We now know that she's living in Dubai, so maybe, of course, maybe there is some kind of a connection here between the general agenda of the Emirates and what's happening in France, at least in terms of discourse. Because indeed, for instance, the last few years, the state's intellectuals, the state sociologists, the state itself was pointing fingers on Salafiyya, on the Salafiyya, on Salafism, on this kind of so-called radicalized and fanatics. Now it's obviously the Muslim Brotherhood, but it has also, I think, something that's more anthropological. I think. Maybe Hurriya, we lost Hurriya. I think that there is something more, maybe even more frightening that this kind of geopolitics is that now the fear is not only those who separate, but also those who are living amongst us and they are hiding themselves. The idea of taqiyya, for instance, the idea that there are people living, they are in companies, in universities, in NGOs and this kind of things, and they have a hidden agenda for taking over power in this kind of places. So this is very frightening because indeed it looks like a very common idea of the classical anti-Semitism, that people are hiding and they are playing in the hidden parts of society and controlling over all of the politics and so on. And now there is something of it in France. If I can just react to the idea of the link between Islamophobia and elections, I absolutely agree. Of course, I agree with the you're right. Of course, all the politics here in France, in the United States, in the UK, they are playing on the Islamophobia level to increase their chances and so on. But there is also something more structural to it. Why they are speaking of Islam and Islamophobia and not I don't know, not another community or I don't know. It means that it has some value. It's a currency. It's a currency that has some value. And being a currency that has some value, I think that we should ask what's the problem, at least for the French state, to people being Muslims or to people being a Muslim community here in France. And I think it's really linked to the core of what's the French state. The French state is not like the United States. It's a very powerful state. I mean, in not only as a repressive state, but also as a educational, as social welfare, as social work, and so on. So one could say that for the French state, repression is the very last option. There is so many options before that. There is education, there is school, there is social work, there is a lot of different parts of the state that can be involved in the general domination without going to the physical violence. So this is, I think, something that should be understood because now France is not of course. They're pointing the possibility of war, but they're also playing on so many different levels. And again, maybe the most impressive measure that was taken by Macron is to make mandatory school from 3 years old, and to make now it's impossible for someone who does not want to put his child in schools. It's impossible now. So this is something very powerful, and it speaks to the idea that yes, it's the state who should I don't know, educate the children, and not
which means that Muslims' ability to have a private schools or engage in private schools would
course.
also would be subject to heavy intrusion, which is not the same toward other communities in this sense.
I don't know because I hear what was saying Ramon earlier, but I think that of course it's so much more visible and strong against Muslims in France. But I think this is still the general position of the French state towards communities. The French state does not tolerate communities at all, at all. And I think, of course, for the Muslims, it's so much more, violent and visible and so on. But this is something that is at the core of the French state. It's rules over individuals and never communities. This is
Maybe in the last 10 minutes, if we could tell, what could people do in the United States, Muslims who want to support our allies or other places? What are you asking from us? Last time, we came and asked us for solidarity, and that's how we started having the Islamophobia conference in Paris as a way for us to actually study and engage. What are things that we can do from here in the United States, as well as others in different parts, both to express solidarity, but also to help at this moment? And we could go both maybe to Horia first, then we could back to Ramon, and then Hamza.
Actually, I don't really know because I think we need your solidarity and you need our solidarity with Trump.
Yeah.
So this is the situation. The global situation is so frightening everywhere in the West that I think that we have to think how to consolidate our movements, how to consolidate our solidarity throughout the West. This is not a question that we can answer here in a few minutes. We have to build it, and this is a political task. I don't have any other options.
Ramon?
Yes, the French Republic is a white supremacist system. They are hiding behind the principles of equality and French Republic, a white supremacist, a white communitarianism, a white separatism that is the one calling the shots and calling everybody else communitarian, separatist, etc. And this is what they're doing, and it's a form of white supremacy that operates with different institutional practices than in the USA. And that's what makes it difficult for many people to understand France in itself, because France has its own form of white supremacy that is very particular to the history of France, etc. And sometimes people get confused because you will see these white elites calling for equality, but what they do is absolutizing equality to such a way where they are really installing a system of inequality in the name of equality. It's a very complicated rhetorical and institutional system that unless you're inside, it's very difficult to get it, because it's very confusing the way they do it. For people who are not there or who do not know well the French Republic. And what they're doing now, and it's a thing going on for a long time, is that they're making the Republic a new religion. They're fetishizing the Republic. The Republic is God. You cannot have a God beyond the Republic. And if you have a God beyond the Republic, you become subversive. They immediately attack you. Because the God, the new God, is the Republic. So they're sacralizing the Republic. They're fetishizing the Republic. The Republic is the new fetish, the new sacredness. And so anything that challenges that is immediately put as a threat to the structures of the white supremacy, capitalist domination in France. And so I think our job outside will be to, in a sense, call attention to these atrocities that are being made. I think that we have to be, of course, in solidarity with what is happening in France. And as Horia said, we need to strengthen the links of solidarity across the world, especially inside the West. There have to be struggles of solidarity because the rise of fascism is around the corner. It's right here. It's with us. And it's going to get only worse. And the problem with the white left, both in the USA as well as in France, is that the white left share a lot of the premises against which they're fighting against. So that weakens their struggle. For example, the French left is a classical Islamophobic left. And so how could you fight back the Islamophobia of a law like this one if you are yourself Islamophobic and you participate in a lot of the premises of Macron's discourse? It's impossible. So, and what they don't see, this is where they're short-sighted, is that today's the Muslims, but the same law they're trying to approve now in the name of so-called separatism is the same law that could be applied to anybody else. And it could be applied to the left in the future. It could be applied to Christians. It could be applied to Jews, to anybody. And so this is a law that is disguised. It's a fascist law disguised as some kind of Muslim threat. But once it's approved, it's a law that applies to everybody. And what they're doing is right now creating the conditions for fascism. The moment Marine Le Pen comes to power, she won't have to do any kind of law or reform. The laws will be already there for her to implement her fascistic agenda. And this is the danger of the whole thing. Thank you.
Hamza?
No, this is a very crucial question, and I agree with Horia. This is a very difficult question. We don't have the answers. Maybe dua, but not only, of course, dua. Maybe also we could say that yes, I think that the Muslim situations in not only in France, but I'm thinking of China, of the genocide, ongoing genocide on Uyghurs, in India, which is already a fascistic state with Muslims and so on. I think that the only thing we can think of is how to build a non-nationalistic solidarity, how to build a solidarity that goes over nations and the nation states. And it's a very difficult question because our world is built on the idea of nation states, and it's very difficult to go above that. But I think this is the only answer to this global rise of fascism, as Horia and yourself and Ramon put it. I agree, and this is, I think, the only answer we can have. But it's not easy, of course. But what choice do we have?
Yeah. Well, maybe for me to conclude that we were planning to do the December conference back in Paris again jointly. So maybe we'll try to organize the conference online and begin to put really how to construct and develop transnational solidarities while dealing with the particularities of Islamophobia, the French case, the case in India, the UK, in Canada, United States, even in Muslim majority countries. So let me write something up for us to get this gathering going, maybe online, with the focus of how to construct transnational solidarity for that.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, so I'll put something together, propose the dates, since we were planning on a physical conference. It's not going to be possible with the COVID-19 and the second wave that we're in the middle of it. So we'll do it online, and we'll try to manage the time. So at least both on transatlantic, both the Europe and the US, we could at least participate within manageable time.
Thank you, Hatem. That's a great idea.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Stay safe. Wish you and all your family the best. We pray for you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect you. And we're here constantly in solidarity with you. And we know that you have your solidarity back in the United States. And I look forward to reading your thesis once it's completed. And look forward to it. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Horia.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, Ramon.
Walaikum salam.
And thank you, everyone that joined us on a short notice.
Thank you.
Yo.
Thank you.